propaganda versus the truth. You're with Swedish-British journalist Pelle NEROTH Taylor on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome to the Pelle NEROTH Taylor Show on this Friday, the 20th of September, 2024. Well, probably it's filtered through by now to many of the regular listeners that TNT, or this iteration of TNT right here, right now, is going to stop broadcasting on, as of today. I think today is the last day. So certainly it's my last show on this particular iteration and this particular platform, although of course my work will continue, and keep an eye out for that. And I don't want to say too early, these things are quite fluid, as everyone knows in these situations, but I'm very glad to have worked here, and I'd like to give a shout out to Cam, Murray, Anoop, and all the other people in the studio who've done fantastic work. You wouldn't believe that something so seemingly simple, even in these internet days of advanced technology, which allow us to broadcast as a kind of global channel with people in different countries, all providing their perspectives and their input, and quite successfully. It does require quite a lot of technology and one particular home base where this technology is gathered around, and that's in Gold Coast in Australia. Lucky them, they've been enjoying their tropical weather with the odd, typhoon or whatever you call them, whereas we in Europe are enjoying our usual Northern Hemisphere weather. I remember when I first joined in January, the snow was a meter high in this northern latitude in Sweden, whereas Mike, who's the boss, was wearing his Hawaiian t-shirt and squinting into the evening sun from his elegant office complex on the Gold Coast. And then I realized what global broadcasting is like, and we're completely different time zones, but it worked out surprisingly well. And as said, it required a lot of behind the scenes work. It's not just completely obvious that I'm just sitting here in front of a camera and everything goes hunky-dory. There is work behind the scenes. So a shout out to those. And of course, to my producer, Kimberly, who from her perspective, sitting in Florida, has done fantastic work at making this show come alive and be possible. Herding cats, that's what it's like getting guests together sometimes. You wouldn't believe the scope for misunderstanding on equipment to be used and time to turn up, especially with all these time zones, especially with summertime and wintertime, creating confusion, and even among the best of them. But altogether, we've had a fantastic roster of guests, particularly pertaining to the US election. Brilliant minds. Some of the it's like the best, most privileged job one could ever have in picking the brains of some really clever people from all over the world, and they've given their time for free, and their perspectives have enabled me to get a much better view of the world than I knew a couple of months ago, even though I thought I was quite clued up. I just want to say a little note about what I was trying to do on this show, what I aim to continue to try and do. Mike, the boss, said, well, he was a man of few words in context of what he wanted me to do. And it basically is tell the truth. And that's what I've always tried to do. I've been a truth discoverer and a truth finder. And this has always been my aim. I have to admit that to my closest friends, sometimes I say, well, sometimes my show, I feel as if I'm walking around in a sort of American country fair, the early 20th century, and there are preachers standing on the back of their wagons, each with their view of the world, and, you listen and you move on to the next one. But I think that's the reason why America is actually the center of innovation. I mean, the center of conspiracy theory is also inevitably a center of innovation, because let's say you have 10 different theories out there, and about how the world functions. I mean, in the old days, it was a religiously centered view of the world, and America was the place of 1,000 religions. Well, here it's a sort of a way that power structures are formulated around the world. And if you don't hear all of them, you can't make up your own mind about which one is more likely to be true, or whether they're all slightly true in some ways. I mean, power systems are not an exact science. And you don't need to be in a university academic environment to hear them or to formulate them or to try and understand them. And if you're talking about Marxism, which had its grip on Western universities for decades, well, I mean, isn't that this conspiracy theory as much as the rest of the one, which is not backed up by science in any way? I mean, the labor theory of value is comprehensively being debunked. If we stay within the sort of narrow confines of the mainstream media and their very, I don't know, dampening view of free thought and free speech, then that's authority talking at you, and you'll feel smug that you understand the world better, but you're really not. But here at this show, we're sort of pushing the boundaries, as it were, and actually we're doing this in a way to enfranchise the public out there, you, the viewing public, because we want you to exercise your critical thinking and make up your own mind. I mean, we're putting these things out. A lot of it we think will widen your understanding how the world really works. Let's say pedophile networks. Let's say the immense corruption of the pharmaceutical industry. Perhaps the way that the vaccines have been deployed to for carelessness at the very least, in the name of profits. These are things you wouldn't find out about the mainstream media. And just to take a relatively minor thing, I think it's quite well established if you follow our show and all the brilliant vaccine skeptical guests, that the COVID virus originated in a lab, and it was a lab leak. I mean, there've been so many lab leaks down the years. I've had a couple of excellent guests who've been talking about how some of the diseases we think, arose naturally, arose out of the American pharmaceutical biological complex, a good case for it. Not 100%, but let's say 50, 60%. And then there's quite good evidence that you can deduce for this. Well, so the lab leak argument, better minds than me have given all the rundowns and all the lies. They've given, people like Paul Thacker have been going through all the emails from all the people, the scientists or pseudoscientists deep inside the pharmaceutical lobby or interest, as it were, industry, and with a vested interest in putting out non-true science. That's the other thing, incidentally, just how corrupt the medical journals are. That's why a real take-home, says someone who really looked up to the science journals. But anyway, not to be too sidetracked by that. The latest in the London Times and in the big media is how this virus turned up in an animal market after all. And I know what happens if you hadn't been trained. Have you hadn't watched this show, you might say, well, it's the London Times. They've got such a fantastic typeface. It's got a 200-year-old history, and the London Times, and you can buy it in the newsstands, and you associate it with the bowler hats and the 914 from Farnborough into London. It's got a weight of immense prestige, but in fact, it's a conspiracy theory, the idea that it landed in a wet mark. And if you go to X, which I think is a kind of written equivalent of what we're trying to do here at TNT, you'd find out that there's a very, very strong case for having been coming out of a lab. I mean, you can go to Matt Ridley, for instance, in his X account. He gives all the details. He actually wrote a book about it. And some of the people who've been on my show, Paul Thacker's a good place to start as well. But, the point is, Elon Musk is at so much at odds with the establishment, because I think Elon Musk gets it about the fantastic thing about the new media possibilities. He's talking about citizen journalism, people gathering together in informal ways all across the internet, and then combining to research things and then putting it out on X, where there are no censors and no barriers, except for some very, very, very strong ones against sort of, I don't know, incitement to hatred or something, or violence. But anyway, that's good journalism, but guess what? Journalism is not a protected profession. You go through 1 year of journalism school and you can call yourself a journalist, but anyone can actually call themselves a journalist, and anyone can do good journalism. It's a state of mind, critical thinking and open-mindedness. So he's doing that, and I think we've got X producing much better journalism and, let's say, the Trump assassination attempts than anything in the mainstream media have done. And we at TNT, a lot of people prefer to hear things and have them critically examined by journalists such as me to ask questions. They don't want to troll through X, so we do that for you. So that's where X, TNT, and its successors, and we're hoping there will be a successor, are doing for you. So you combine TNT, combine X, I think you'll be truly better informed about the world than if you just read those old legacy newspapers. And it is a bit like a period of ferment that followed the religious wars in the 1520s, actually lasted for 100 years, where the Protestants who were that the alternative media, if you like, in of the 15th and 16th century, kicking against the pricks, kicking against the power structures of the age, the Catholic Church, and people died endlessly because they had different worldviews. You had and of course the rise of Protestantism led to the Enlightenment in Northern Europe and modern science and all the rest of it, critical thinking. Now we're seeing the Catholic Church in a way was smashed. It's a monopoly on truth was smashed. But we're seeing a return to that, I guess now, and we perhaps need, we're sort of seeing a new religious warfare. It's not about religion; it's about versions of reality. So it's actually quite secular because we believe in evidence-based truth as well here in the alternative sphere. But the alternative sphere versus the authority sphere is just like the religious wars of the 17th century. And I think we will come out triumphant, just as Protestantism came out triumphant. And maybe we'll see a new world order. And I think bright minds like Elon Musk certainly see that. And so we do hope you carry on following my show and check out our websites and on Google for further updates. But we're going to have 4 guests, returning guests, who've all contributed greatly to the whole issue I've been talking about enlightenment. And they will be on over the next 2 hours. The first guest will be with us after a very quick break. This is the Pelle NEROTH Taylor Show on TNT News Talk for the last time in this iteration.
For a complete list of shows and our schedule offered on TNT, simply visit our website at tnt.news, keeping you in the loop on today's news talk, TNT.
Welcome back to the Pelle NEROTH Taylor Show on this Friday, the 20th of September, 2024. Well, one of those guests who's made it such a delightful job to have here on TNT is Ivan Katchanovski, who is gone straight against establishment view on what actually has been going on in Ukraine. He's written one of the best books, I think, on the Maidan operation, Maidan revolution back in 2014, which the mainstream media blames entirely on the then prime minister and political leadership who were ousted rather unceremoniously, and actually puts the blame on the West ultimately, and certainly on those sainted protesters at the Maidan. And he's a political scientist at the University of Ottawa, and his specialities are conflicts, policy, and political communication in Ukraine. Just a heads up, he's crowdfunding via GoFundMe /52B68E07, and he's that's to pay for an open access edition fee for his book, The Maidan Massacre in Ukraine, the mass killing that changed the world, which has just been published by Palgrave Macmillan, which is an imprint of Springer. Anyway, welcome to the show, Ivan. Good to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be joining your show.
Well, we've got a situation where I know we've talked about this, but it doesn't do any harm to talk about it again. I mean, people don't have such long memories. We've now, last Friday, the world was on tenterhooks, everyone who followed these things closely, when it seemed that Starmer and Biden were going to authorize long-range strikes on Ukraine, which Putin said that means war. And some clever people said, well, that could have been maybe the end of the world. Some people said that the Americans would breeze through the Russian red line and nothing would happen, but there are others who said, no, that just because the Russian bear can be prodded 5 times doesn't mean you can prod him the 6th time, and he might strike out in very violent ways. The point is, we're here in a terrible situation for peace in the world, in Eastern Europe and Middle East, of course. But how did it start? Well, it started with 2014. It didn't start in 2022. I know, at risk of repeating yourself, I read the fantastic review by Gunther Verheugen's assistant, and maybe I can bring that in. But tell me, can you give me, again, the 5-minute account or something of the Maidan massacre as it really happened?
Yes, this massacre was a crucial event which led to overthrow of the relatively pro-Russian Yanukovych government in Ukraine and escalated in the annexation of Crimea by Russia, in the civil war, Russian military interventions in Donbass, and finally it escalated with Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is now a major war, I think most important war since World War II. And I examined all the evidence, publicly available evidence, including the Maidan massacre trial and investigation evidence, and all the evidence shows that this massacre started with shooting and killing of the police by snipers who were located in building of music conservatory, which was controlled by far right wing company or special arm Maidan company, which was part of the Maidan opposition movement. So they started shooting and killing police. 4 policemen were killed, and several dozen were wounded. And after the police fled from this Maidan area, which is Independence Square area in Kiev, and then shooting and massacre of Maidan protesters started. In full scope, because initially police were shot not only by snipers who were located in music conservatory, but they were also shooting from Hotel Ukraina, which was also controlled by far-right Svoboda party, and they were also shooting protesters in the police, and then snipers in the Hotel Ukraina and other Maidan control locations started shooting and killing Maidan protesters, and they killed and this was done live on television cameras, and all the media basically blame government forces for doing this, but all evidence, including testimonies of Maidan eyewitnesses, like several hundred eyewitnesses whom I cite in my book, even absolute majority of wounded Maidan protesters or activists testified they were shot by snipers in the Hotel Ukraina and other locations which were not controlled by government forces but were controlled by opposition, Maidan opposition, and or that they witnessed snipers there. And even government ballistic and medical examinations by forensic experts show the same. So it's now clear, and there are videos of snipers in this location. So this all the evidence is beyond any doubt that this was a false flag massacre, specifically designed to blame government of Yanukovych, even so there was no such order. And even recently, Maidan massacre trial verdict issued decision which stated that Yanukovych did not give such order, that many protesters were shot from Hotel Ukraina, which was occupied and controlled by Maidan protesters or activists.
So basically, I mean, for those who don't remember, the Maidan Square was a main square in Ukraine and near the government offices. And after the ruling party of the time said no to a closer association with the EU because the economics didn't work for Ukraine. I mean, it was a bad deal. Crowds began to gather, and they had braziers, and they ganged up against the cold, and they put up tents and so on. And incidentally, what they were doing in Ukraine wouldn't be allowed in London or Paris. I mean, everyone knows that demonstrations can run riots, so they were allowed to do this anyway, and it was kind of taken over by hardliners, initially peaceful protest, and there was violence, and then it all culminated in February 2014 with an alleged shooting by the security forces of these kind of innocent protesters. What your book shows conclusively, hundreds of witness testimony, videos, it's all there in your book. I mean, because there are a lot of mobile phones and TV cameras from Western companies, it all came from the own side, as it were. So snipers working from a hotel belonging to the resistance movement, and they were on the top floors shooting from hotel windows or from the roof at the protesters, aimed at getting the police and security forces of the government blamed for that, so they could then go and oust them. And get rid of them and say, look, they're cracking down too hard. So it's a classic false flag operation. False flag is when you shoot at your own side and then you get journalists to report that it was the other side shooting at it, and you have the cause for a revolution or a war or something. So it's to create victims and then blame it on the other side. But these were murdering their own side, these snipers. You're saying, and you've got a fantastic review here from Günther Verheugen, who's a European commissioner at the time. She seems pretty convinced by it. And she writes, for instance, that Katchanovski brings out long-forgotten things. Bellingcat announced an investigation into the Maidan massacre, but never delivered. But Bellingcat is this kind of, NATO-affiliated investigative body, which has got a high reputation in the Western media. But I mean, it only publishes the bad things that the Russians allegedly, but it doesn't publish the bad things that the West does. So that hence they didn't deliver on this report. The FBI has always also had an important original sources since 2015, but the FBI also remained silent. within the EP, there's also been a request from the MPs from a thorough investigation into the violence in Odessa and the Maidan massacre, but that's gone unheard. Of course, the European Parliament has just called for long-range strikes into Ukraine. So, I mean, they're totally misinformed. What is it the FBI knew, for instance, about this? Because that's something I didn't hear before. Do they know the truth about the Maidan?
I think I cited in my book a report in Ukrainian media which quoted Prosecutor General of Ukraine. At the time, he was from far-right Svoboda Party, basically the one which was involved in Maidan massacre. And this Prosecutor General of Ukraine said that Ukrainian investigation sent videos from the Maidan massacre to FBI to enhance them. To make, because a lot of videos were showed on social media and so on, and there was no other follow-up, no other reports, nothing in this case. And I think it's almost definitely U.S. government knows actually what happened, U.S. administration knows what happened, but for political reasons they are silent about this, because I think this is a kind of a deception, I think, and misinformation or false news or fake news, which is much more serious than what happened in Iraq, this Iraq war, weapons of mass destruction, because of the consequences of this. And I also mentioned in my book, this is quite unprecedented to see such kind of evidence, hundreds of testimonies, several hundreds of testimonies, including the Maidan massacre trial. Videos, I have more than 10 videos of snipers, Maidan snipers, including from BBC and CNN, which was never shown, CNN video which was never shown with Maidan snipers and so on. And all this and ballistic and forensic examinations, and this is never reported and by the major media. So they basically also kind of deliberately misrepresent this in order to advance political agenda. And in this case, I think Ukrainians and Ukraine are used basically as a tool of Western governments to kind of initially to overthrow Russian government in Ukraine in 2014, and now to again try to weaken Russia during this war, which I think Ukraine is not able to win and would be devastating and catastrophic for Ukraine if it would end soon, and this is, or if it would continue again without any real prospect of defeating Russia. And I think this is quite unbelievable. And now I have a book published, so I'm going to see what kind of reaction, but I don't expect anything different from what was before. Even so, there are some signs that there would be mainstream media maybe finally would report some of this.
I mean, so basically your book sources, I mean, hundreds of witness testimonies, because there were commissions in Ukraine afterwards, but nobody paid attention to them, you know. And there's footage, as you said, from CNN and BBC, but that's been squirreled away in the vaults and it was never shown. And all this, I mean, it's like the war. We know that the Iraq war was a lie. This is just as bad a lie, or even worse. And people, pretty soon after the Iraq war, people learned, oh, this was based on a lie. But we still haven't learned, and that took about 2 years for people to realize that. Now it's 10 years on from the Maidan massacre, and we still don't know. The official story is that maybe it was the Russians were shooting at the innocent protesters. And if you ask, half of people probably say that, but they said it was the guys supported by the West. Was the West giving orders for this massacre? I mean, were there Americans involved? I know that the snipers were supposed to be Georgian and Lithuanian and Polish and their Western allies.
Yes, I examined also evidence of involvement of other countries like Russia and the Western countries in this massacre, and Georgian snipers and so on. And I can say there is no evidence whatsoever about Russian snipers' involvement in this massacre. And even government investigation officially stated that there was no such involvement. They checked this. They investigated this for more than 10 years, and they did not find any such evidence of involvement of Russian snipers in the Maidan massacre. And Maidan massacre trial verdict also stated that there was no such involvement of Russian agents in the Maidan massacre. So this is like another fake and false story.
If there had been Russian fingerprints, we would hear about it for sure, because the West wants to make the best case for itself. After we're just getting into a quick news break. After that, I just want to ask you, because we always try to be evidence-based on this show, how people can find out for themselves and check your claims and facts. But we'll be back with Ivan Katchanovski, excellent scholar of Ukraine, after a very quick news break.
CO2 sustains all life on Earth, but now it's in long-term decline. We face the return of an ice age. We mandate that the truth be told on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to the Pelle and NEROTH Taylor Show. We've got Ivan Katchanovski, a friend and returning guest. I think he's been on my show about 3 times. He's just written a book called The Maidan Massacre in Ukraine, the mass killing that changed the world. This was the event 10 years ago where dozens of people were killed, and it caused huge headlines, and it led to change of government in Ukraine. A lot of people said it was a coup. But the pro-Westerners say, well, no, it was a peaceful, necessary change of power against an evil dictator who fired at his own people. But Ivan shows that he wasn't firing at his own people. It was the good guys, the guys that we were backing, who were firing at their own people from the hotel behind the protesters. And all the gun tracks and all the video footage, of which there was plenty, show that. And you have many other testimonies. It's all out there. Ivan, how can people find out for themselves? They go to your book and see your claims. Can they double check your claims?
Yes, and all my evidence is open. I cite all the sources which I use, publicly available sources, and I created several video appendixes. This one video appendix contains video reconstruction of the entire massacre from hundreds of videos of the massacre, which from the start to finish, with all important developments, including showing Maidan snipers. Another video shows synchronized videos of the shooting, which shows that Berkut police members who were accused of being responsible for this massacre actually did not shoot from their Kalashnikovs at the time when specific protesters were killed and wounded, and that it shows that these police members were shooting into Hotel Ukraina, snipers located in this upper floors of the hotel, because these snipers were shooting both at the protesters and the police. And even Maidan massacre trial verdict, they can check the text of this verdict in Ukrainian, more than about 1 million word, and I have a summary, or I have extracts from this verdict translated into English language on my website, which shows actually which found that there was no order from Yanukovych government to massacre Maidan protesters, and that many protesters were killed from Hotel Ukraina and wounded from Hotel Ukraina, and that this hotel was controlled by Maidan opposition at that time, included by this far-right link company of snipers whom I found in my own study. And in addition to this, my video appendixes contain testimonies, witness testimonies of more than 100 witnesses from various social media and media who testified about snipers in Hotel Ukraina and other Maidan control locations. And this this video appendix was shown at the Maidan massacre trial, but the verdict said that they could not accept this as evidence, which was not evidence, again, for the trial. I just did this for my own study, but they said because this is a film, like a movie, which was obviously not the case. This is just only video compilations of testimonies about snipers, more than 100. And also another video appendix contained testimonies at the Maidan massacre trial investigation by more than 50 wounded Maidan activists who testified that they were wounded by snipers located in Hotel Ukraina and other Maidan control buildings and areas, or that they witnessed snipers in these locations. So, and another video appendix contains.
So sorry, because people
witnesses of the trial, yes.
People just witness testimonies from people who are the victims, who are sort of anti-government, as it were. That ranks pretty high. I mean, that's important testimony. So these 50 people who reported that their own side were firing on them, where is the original source for that testimony?
This is a video.
Video. Okay.
Broadcast of Maidan massacre trial, which were posted on and were posted live on and were streamed live from the Maidan massacre trial court in Kyiv in Ukraine since 2016. Okay. So I examined all the videos I was following and saw recording.
So it was actually broadcast live in Kiev. I mean, which was then run by the opposition, as it were, or the anti-Russian government. They allowed this trial to take place, which was very unflattering to their case. It's all out there. why did anyone meet? Did the Ukrainian media report on these trials? Did the Western media report on these trials? Or did the story not get out?
All the testimonies, with exception, I think, testimony of one wounded Maidan activist in the Ukrainian media, were totally blacked out, like covered up.
Blacked out, okay.
And even so, this was publicly available. It was shown live on YouTube, but only about 50 people on average watched these videos. This was quite incredible. I say this is a tale of the century. And my new paper about this verdict and decision of Ukrainian tale, which is also examined in my book, which was just published, would be also presented in detail in a conference of International Studies Association conference in March of next year in Chicago. So this is another study which I'm going to present all this evidence, because again, there is also appeal hearing about this tale verdict. So all evidence is publicly available, but it was not presented. This is also quite unprecedented, because for me this is unbelievable. I call this like Orwell 1984, because this is kind of everything is open, but they bury this under kind of all this.
It's interesting because it's not only about censorship. I mean, we have freedom of speech and then freedom of reach, right? Freedom of speech means that you're free to say it without being censored, and these are official trials, and so they were free to say it, and it's all out there. But you don't have freedom of reach. As you said, there are only 50 people at a time watching these incredible revelations that showed that our side, as it were, of the Ukrainians shooting at their own people to killing them, and then creating a sort of a victim complex so that we'd topple the government, the government, the sort of neutral government that tried to balance between Russia and the West. And so, in other words, we've got a totally different narrative than the actual reality. And I know, and I remember, for those people who do trust the BBC and so on, the BBC Gabriel Gatehouse did a documentary about this for Newsnight. And I think the ARD Monitor program, that's a big German program, they also did it, but it's just disappeared. So, I mean, even these Western journalists, as it were, with big names, they reported what you're saying, but people forget, and then the news cycle moves on. So I think is the BBC and the ARD reports still out there on YouTube, or can people find it for themselves?
I think BBC report is still out there, but ARD report was missing. And actually, Maidan massacre trial verdict also confirmed my findings of my studies that this BBC television crew, including this BBC journalists, were shot at from the Hotel Ukraina by sniper who was located in a room which was occupied by a member of the parliament from the far-right Svoboda party. And they state this in verdict, and the same concerns shooting of two German RD television journalists in their rooms in the Hotel Ukraina by snipers who were located in Maidan, in the right sector controlled main office building in Ukraine on Maidan. Again, and this was never reported by any media. This is in Ukraine. This is quite unprecedented, because you have journalists who were targeted and almost killed, and there was no investigation of this. Again, a total silence, even by BBC and by RD. And I also mentioned in my kind of book quite incredible cover-up of key evidence by German RD television, because there was a film of or video recording of the entire massacre for 1.5 hours by a Ukrainian journalist who was working for this German television, public television network. And he said, that he filmed this video from Hotel Ukraina, but this video, that RD would not release this video even for him or for Maidan massacre trial. Even so, this is like key video which was leaked by somebody without any sound and cut into pieces.
So Ivan, what you're saying is ARD, which is the biggest German channel, it's super famous, as famous as the BBC, they captured it all on video and on film. And that could have produced key evidence, but they've censored it. And so next time they tell you they're all about exposing their truth, they're not. They're into the censorship industry. Ivan, I'm afraid we're going to wind up there. I call you a Ukrainian patriot because you care. I mean, you're Canadian Ukrainian. You're a professor at the University of Ottawa, and I know there are many Ukrainians there. But you are a patriot of a different kind than the nationalists who just basically destroying you or leading the destruction of Ukraine. I mean, 1 million people have died. The population has been wiped out, a demographic collapse and economic collapse. Would you describe yourself, Ivan, as a Ukrainian patriot, but of a different kind of patriot than the nationalist? We can't go into much detail, but I just want to ask you that quick question.
Yes, I think I can not use like such a kind of how to say because I'm a researcher, so I try to be objective in my research, but I care deeply about Ukraine, and this is one of main motivations of my research, kind of because this will be very helpful to kind of resolve this conflict and to end this conflict in Ukraine. I think because consequences that Ukrainians pay up because of as a result of this massacre are tremendous, and even so, I sacrifice my own property in Ukraine were confiscated basically or taken away by court decision based on fraudulent evidence in retaliation for my Maidan massacre studies. So they take away all my house in Western Ukraine, all my property, my land after I revealed.
Ivan, sorry, we've got to wind up there, Professor Katchanovski. You've paid the consequences because you have land and property in Western Ukraine that was confiscated. Of course, you're not a friend of the current regime, or they don't like you very much because you're exposing the truth. But of course, you care deeply about Ukraine and you regard yourself as a Ukrainian patriot, and you believe that the truth will set us free, as we all do. Thank you so much, Ivan Katchanovski. Check out your papers and your book. The Maidan massacre in Ukraine, the mass killing that changed the world. It's a fantastic book, published by Palgrave Macmillan, imprint of Springer, one of the world's biggest academic publishers, and goes against what we hear in our mainstream media, but doesn't have to be less true for that. Thank you so much, sir. And we've got to go into our next guest after a very quick break.
Discussing national and international issues. You're listening to Pelle NEROTH Taylor on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to the Pelle NEROTH Taylor Show, the last day of TNT in this particular iteration, and we're bringing back some of our best and favorite guests, truth tellers, all of them fighting against the many multi-headed hydra of big mainstream media propaganda. We've got our friend Jarrett Stepman, who's a columnist for the Daily Signal, author of The War on History, The Conspiracy to Rewrite America's Past. Welcome back to the show, Jarrett.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, yeah, I was just talking to Ivan Katchanovski then about his very well-sourced book on what really happened at the Maidan massacres back in 2014 and dishonestly reported by the Western media. Anyway, here we are, 10 years on in this growing conflict between Russia and the West. And are we on the brink of World War III? It seemed to be like that last Friday afternoon when all the experts were following this closely. Well, we were really on tenterhooks. What do you make? Well, can you remind us of this event and what your take on it is and where we're going next? If we're out of the woods or we're still in danger of World War III?
No, we're certainly not out of the woods. And I think there's been a lot of talk of a potential that the U.S. could be giving essentially long-range missiles to Ukraine to hit strategic targets within the confines of Russia itself, which I think is treated like, well, this is an important war measure, but it certainly is, I think, crossing a certain red line that the Russian government has said so. They've made it very clear that this is a huge escalation in the war. This is not just another weapon being deployed on a defensive war. This is an offensive weapon being supplied by the United States, and that is a very serious escalation. And I think what's most disturbing about this is there very little explanation from American leaders as to A, how this is exactly going to change the dynamic of this war, and B, what is this doing for American interests if we do end up in a larger confrontation with Russia, a nuclear power, a country that says that they're willing to start restart nuclear testing as a result of this. These are very concerning things, especially when you consider the fact that we have an out-to-lunch presidency, the lamest of lame duck sessions, and a government that seems to be sleepwalking into something that could be catastrophic. I mean, not just for Russia, the United States, Ukraine, but the entire globe.
I know. Well, it seems that I don't know what the latest talk is in Washington, but it seems that Keir Starmer, I mean, the British have always been the biggest hawks. And Blinken, they went to Kiev, and the British foreign minister, totally inexperienced, David Lammy, they agreed, or they listened to Zelensky and said, yeah, we're going to do this. This is a good idea. Don't forget, Zelensky's only hope is to bring America into a shooting war with Russia. I mean, but that's their interest. It's not necessarily our interests, you know. And it's not the world's interest, because if it goes nuclear, Ukraine is going to be a smoking ash heap, just like the rest of it. It's like a kind of guy who's going to commit suicide, and he drags you down with him, a drowning man who's going to make you drown as well. Anyway, they turned up. It was not in the US news. It seems you were doing something completely different. You were in your very interesting election campaign, but I followed the UK news very closely. And there you had Starmer on his plane, surrounded by these munchkin journalists, all sticking their microphones into front of him, saying. And he says, he talked tough. Putin, he can always end this war anytime he wants by pulling out. And that's exactly the kind of tough talk I remember Blair and Bush doing in 2003 before the Iraq War. But Iraq is a useless little tin pot country, with no nukes or anything. Russia has 6,000 nukes and ABM defenses and all the rest of it. I mean, their hypersonic missiles can take out CIA, Pentagon, MI6, Downing Street, the White House, when the West can't do anything, even if it's not nuclear warheads, and then the nuclear warheads on top of it, they're going to restart nuclear testing up in their old testing grounds in Novaya Zemlya, which is what they did in the 1960s when the Cold War was at its coldest last time. And, we're talking Americans. I love the American election campaign. It's kind of a great show. But, you have this looming thing. It's like a meteorite approaching Earth, and you're obsessed with the little sexual shenanigans and things like that. I mean, are Americans aware of what's going on?
No, yeah, I don't think people really fully realize the danger, not just there, but around the globe. I mean, we are, I think, very much focused on our own elections. And, when we talk about what's happening in Ukraine, I mean, it's not very credible as far as these threats go, because look, the reality is Russian forces are continuing to make progress in eastern Ukraine. I mean, they had this major Ukrainian offensive into Russia, into the Kursk section. I mean, again, that doesn't change the dynamics of this war. The Russians are very happy to continue making progress in the only front that really matters here. Giving these strategic missiles doesn't change the manpower dynamic between these countries. It doesn't change the dynamic of what's happening on the eastern front there. And so it feels like the United States is being drawn into a larger conflict just ahead of an election where one man is saying that he can, through negotiation, end this war. It seems almost like they're trying to create a larger catastrophe that can't be removed from. And I think that's what's really scary about this, is we seem to be sleepwalking into a larger confrontation with a major military power. Despite what, I think a lot of Western media says about Russia's capacity, they are a very serious power. I think they've actually, in some ways, have grown as a military power throughout this conflict. It's a very worrying thing. And the fact that we are now getting deeper into this at a time, I think, for U.S. interests, it's better for us to de-escalate this situation. We seem to be escalating quite substantially. And who knows if this ends up with attacks around the world or even on the U.S. homeland. I mean, it's very scary stuff that really isn't being talked about very much in the United States.
Absolutely. I mean, and even if I think the Russian military is very powerful. Okay, make no mistake about that. But even if they weren't, they've always got nukes, right? I mean, got thousands of nukes, and any one of them, all you need is one hit on Washington or New York or London. I mean, you could take out the whole UK with 2 or 3 bombs. So the risks are enormous, and and these people said, oh, well, Russia, can poke them. They don't have any red lines. Oh, their nuclear weapons don't work anyway. You want to F around and find out? Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. We're run by lunatics. And as you said, Trump says we're going to make peace. And of course, they're trying to assassinate Trump. But if he does by some chance get elected, of course, a lot of the military industrial complex, all the neocons, be unhappy. I mean, these lunatics. So it's a race against time, basically, between now and the election, as you said, with people fearing that Kamala Harris, we don't know what she's going to stand for. And we've got an idiot president who's not compos mentis, and who's really in charge. I mean, historians will not be kind to us if there is anyone writing history about this. We've got Jake Sullivan calling the shots. Thankfully, I was about to say, I mean, seemed to be an alliance between Jake Sullivan and the Pentagon saying this is not going to fly. And they prevailed on Biden over Blinken and the Brits. But who knows what we'll be thinking next week? Apparently they put it down. They dismissed it and said, well, we're going to talk about it at the UN General Assembly next week. And Zelensky's going to turn up and do his perfect tearjerker performance. And who knows what Biden will say. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, even when you think about long-term strategically for the United States, for Western countries, I think if some kind of negotiated settlement could happen here and even give Western countries, let's say that Russia is the incredible threat that they say it is, right now its military is getting stronger, it's getting experience fighting there. It would be best for the Western world to have a moment to catch its breath after all of this. I mean, to the industrial base of the United States and much of the Western world has very much been hollowed out. I mean, even if you say that, well, hey, the U.S. military, all these things are big and strong, we don't even know that anymore. And I think that if anything, it would be better for not only our own security, but for world peace, you could say, if some kind of settlement could be made here so that the United States could focus on other things. And I think that that doesn't seem to be happening. There's been no real strategic explanation to the American people. And foreign policy issues, I think, oftentimes just simply get forgotten, even though that's the prime responsibility, especially of a president of the United States. And so, again, we are sleepwalking into something potentially very large. Like maybe they're all bluffing. But why are we taking that chance, especially at a time in which we don't really know who's in charge? The buck sort of stops nowhere.
Well, I mean, Trump gets it. I mean, the point is, you say, well, if you talk to young people, they say our biggest concerns is climate change. Fine. I mean, either climate change is happening or it isn't. Maybe it's an existential risk or it's not. But even if it is, it's over a 20 or 30 year time span and you can mitigate it. But I mean, nuclear war is going to destroy life on the planet, so, and it's going to happen in 5 minutes. So why are there stop the oil protesters, but why are there not peace protesters? And I think there's a kind of, I don't know, in Western political culture, it's seen as unmacho to march for peace, because then John Bolton and everyone will sneer at you. But I mean, you can't win a nuclear war, right? It's not about smiting the evil Russians. It's just going to be everyone you love, everything you love is just going to be obliterated. So it's not cool to stand up to the Russians. You've got to find something else because nuclear war is, you can't make the women fall in love with you by defeating Russia because the women will be as dead as you are, basically, just to put it really simply.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about climate change, our climate's going to change a whole lot in a very short amount of time if there's ever kind of nuclear exchange between great powers. I mean, even short of that, even if there's just simply a conventional exchange between a country, pure rivals like Russia and the United States. I mean, look at the amount of casualties we've seen in this war. I mean, a lot of those numbers are not fully and accurately reported, but casualty numbers that we haven't seen in the Western world since World War II, World War I. And those societies, I think, much stronger Western societies barely sustained it at that time. What's going to happen when we end up in that kind of confrontation, especially when the militaries of the West have shrunk dramatically? I mean, there's no question that that's the case. And so are we going to throw away a generation in a massive global confrontation that we are in no way prepared for? It's really scary stuff. I mean, there's a generation of young Americans that could die in a major confrontation. We should be doing everything we can to prevent that.
I know. No, I mean, I read a book about World War One, and World War One in Europe is the catastrophe. I mean, even worse than World War Two, which followed on exactly from World War One. 1 million British young men died. Future novelists, poets, inventors, never given a chance in the pointless mud of the Flanders. And that has set its tone. I mean, European civilization died in World War One, and we ceded control to the Americans and to the Russians. Good for you. But I mean, that was only 1 million people dying. Now we could see 30, 40, 50 million people dying in the UK. Life as it is will go back to the Stone Age, basically. And is it worth it just so that the Russians can't get their fellow speaking pro-Russians in Eastern Ukraine on their side, because Ukraine's history is much more complicated than the Hawks will let you on, But no, I mean, why should we care, really, frankly? I mean, the Ukrainians are going to die anyway. I mean, they're going to die in the nuclear war, so they won't benefit from it. No one benefits. But I remember I grew in the 1980s when I grew up, there was peace movement was everywhere. But the risks were far, far smaller than we are living in today. And I think it's a young generation of politicians. They don't know a damn thing about anything,
I think they don't really understand what could possibly happen. There's this belief that, well, this kind of global war couldn't happen anymore. That's just not possible.
Right.
And I think that's a wrong way of thinking. That's what they thought going into World War I. I mean, there was this book that came out that just before World War I called The Grand Illusion, saying that it was just too expensive economically for these great powers to go to war. So war in the future will just become obsolete. The German general said, well, I'm not an economist. And so wars did happen. It was ruinous for an entire civilization. I worry about something on that scale now. I mean, it's been over 70 years since World War II. We've had no kind of experiences like this. And it is something we should be worried about. Certainly the leaders of our nations, of something this catastrophic taking place and easing the pressure in that situation. Yes. I mean, look, it's bad that Ukraine is getting invaded, certainly, but we have to think strategically about this, especially as the United States or Great Britain or any of these countries have to think about their long-term future. So I think absolutely that this should have been negotiated as a settlement a long time ago. That hasn't happened. I think there's still time to do that, but not with the current trajectory of things, and not given apparently the administration, what seems to be just pushing us closer and closer to an actual major confrontation that goes beyond just what's happening in eastern Ukraine.
I know. And as said, I mean, it's if you're looking at the 1950s and 60s when the Cold War was pretty bad, although, I mean, the Russians back then in the Khrushchev's time didn't have nearly as advanced technology. I mean, they had a far smaller strategic arsenal. They were bluffing, actually. But I mean, I really do think the Russians have all the long distance missiles that they didn't have then. Anyway, people like Kennedy and Eisenhower, they'd fought in World War II. They knew what it was like to have your friends dying on you. And they were very, very cautious. And they knew that nuclear deterrence meant that you couldn't go to war against another nuclear power. Now they call nuclear deterrence nuclear blackmail. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it's like someone is holding a gun to your head, to your wife's head, and you said, I'm not going to go for your blackmail. I'm going to attack you now. And he shoots your wife, and you said, oops, I was wrong. It's like that. Have you got any final thoughts about this? Because we've got to go into the news in 30 or 40 seconds.
Yeah, on top of everything, we don't have any leaders like an Eisenhower in the White House. We don't have these kind of leaders in charge. So even if these are major decisions that need to be made, why should we trust any of the people who are currently there to actually make them? I think that's what's very scary at this moment. It seems to be just a deep state carrying on its own prerogatives outside of the interests of the American people, and being walked into something where, again, the buck stops nowhere. There's nobody really truly in charge, and we walk into something
walking into World War III, and the buck stops nowhere. So, Jarrett Stepman, on that somber note, we have to conclude. Columnist of the Daily Signal, author of The War on History, The Conspiracy to Rewrite America's Past. Thank you so much, sir. And we're going to go into our second hour with more guests and more news. Thank you. This is Pelle NEROTH Daily Show on TNT News Talk.